Hey there, welcome to The Story. I'm Ashley Korslin in for Pat Doris tonight. Police oversight has certainly been in the spotlight over the last several years. Well, next week, an independent oversight board could be created to oversee the West Linn Police Department. City Council is set to take a vote on the idea on Monday. And it all comes amid allegations that the police department did not conduct a thorough investigation into a former local doctor who's accused of sexually abusing more than 100 patients. That's why that's tonight's big story. So earlier this fall, despite the dozens of allegations, a Clackamas County grand jury chose not to indict the ex-doctor. His alleged victims are outraged by that, and some called for more accountability at the West Linn Police Department as they question how the case was investigated in the first place. Before we air this story, though, we have a warning that it does include discussion of sexual abuse.
Even though we begged them to ask for help from other resources, they refused.
Their words resonated during a recent West Linn City Council meeting.
We expect better. We deserve better.
Delivering an emotional plea that even brought the mayor to tears.
Because if we don't have the resources in this nice of a community to protect our women and children, then what good are we? Thank you.
Both Lisa Pratt and Katie Medley are pushing for reform at the West Linn Police Department. Their testimony came during a meeting where City Council discussed creating a police oversight board to investigate claims of officer misconduct. Pratt and Medley say the department mishandled a sexual abuse investigation into a former West Linn doctor. Dr. David Farley is accused of sexually abusing more than 100 women and girls over several decades. Many of the alleged victims came to him for OBGYN care at his practice, West Linn Family Health Center.
In 2019, I had a doctor appointment with him, like a repeat PAP, that he had lied about. It was a completely unnecessary appointment, and he sexually assaulted me in that appointment.
And Katie Medley wasn't alone. Her friend Lisa Pratt detailed a similar experience. She says when she was 9 months pregnant, Dr. Farley asked her to come to his home for a procedure to induce labor.
He swept my membranes, which is a very quick procedure, but then it didn't stop. And I remember laying there wondering, what's happening right now? And then I yelled, ouch, really loud. And he jumped and he started fumbling over his words.
The Oregon Medical Board investigated Farley over claims that he conducted improper pelvic exams on minors and took photos of children's genitals. In 2020, the board revoked his medical license, citing unprofessional or dishonorable conduct and gross repeated acts of negligence. Farley retired and later moved out of state. In September of 2022, after a nearly 2-year criminal investigation, a grand jury in Clackamas County decided not to indict Farley on criminal charges, finding there wasn't enough evidence to prove the claims. Farley still faces a massive civil lawsuit filed on behalf of dozens of his alleged victims.
By the time you get to the police, you feel like you're going somewhere that's safe.
Medley and Pratt blame the lack of indictment on how the investigation was handled. They fault the Clackamas County District Attorney's Office, as well as the West Linn Police Department and lead detective on the case.
He didn't know the questions to ask. In fact, he didn't actually ask me a single question. There was no forensic questioning.
The women say they felt dismissed and were not taken seriously by investigators.
And their investigation, to my knowledge, pretty much consisted of creating a waiting line for the hundreds of women who were calling and telling them, well, you can come give your statement in a month, in 2 months.
I am concerned that this whole investigation was handled in a way that left so many people, victims, angry and frustrated.
West Linn City Council President Rory Bialystowski was moved by Pratt and Medley's statements during the council meeting.
It was heartbreaking and gut-wrenching. They need to know that and feel that they are believed and valued.
Bialystowski says it motivated him to expedite the police oversight board.
And it certainly made me feel like I wanted to push even harder to get our police oversight board up and running.
The board could be used to audit how West Linn police handled the Farley investigation. But the push for more oversight stems from a different incident in 2017. That's when West Linn police wrongfully arrested a black man named Michael Fesser. An officer arrested Fesser on a bogus theft charge at the behest of then police chief Terry Timius. Timius ordered the investigation of Fesser as a favor for a friend who was Fesser's employer at a towing company. Fesser said the arrest was in retaliation for his complaints about a racially hostile work environment. In 2020, the city of West Linn agreed to pay Fesser $600,000 to settle a lawsuit. Then, in the spring of 2022, the police sergeant who arrested Fesser was criminally charged. None of the officers involved in the scandal work for the department anymore, including former Chief Timius. They were all fired or resigned.
People feel it's long overdue.
Bialystowski hopes this new oversight board will help bring a level of transparency to the police department and the city.
I'm hoping that it is a step towards restoring the public trust and having a check and balance on the police misconduct process.
The 5 or 7 member panel will be comprised of residents from the community. They'll evaluate complaints and provide disciplinary recommendations to the city manager.
They'll have access to things that even city councilors and elected officials don't have access to, things like police reports, body camera footage.
Both the West Linn city manager and police chief say they're in full support of the proposal. They also point out that there is currently an outside independent investigation underway into whether the lead detective on the Farley case violated department policy. City Manager John Williams gave us this statement, saying, "We take these allegations seriously, and this is why we're hiring an independent outside investigator. The intent of the work is not to re-examine our entire investigation, but rather to evaluate whether he followed policy and conducted himself in a professional manner consistent with WLPD's standards." Police Chief Peter Mahuna also provided a statement saying, "When the review is finished, we will be in a much better place to determine where opportunities to get better may exist. We will also address any training needs or policy updating that may be needed."
City Council was very empathetic and kind.
As for Pratt and Medley, they're hopeful something positive will come from all of this.
And we felt heard in that meeting. So I hope that while this is a good place to start, I hope some progress is made.
They've now written a letter asking the Oregon Department of Justice to intervene and pursue its own investigation into David Farley.
I will keep fighting. I will keep going until I know that he is behind bars, until he is where he belongs, because I cannot rest knowing that he can hurt other people.
And we reached out for comment to the attorney who was last listed as representing David Farley. We have not heard back. Meanwhile, West Linn City Council will vote on that police oversight board at its meeting next Monday. If it's approved, which the council president does expect to happen unanimously, that board could be up and running by the new year. But first, people will be able to apply and then they'll have to undergo some sort of training. City leaders say this board will be a first of its kind model for smaller cities and possibly the only other oversight board in the metro area, aside from the one that oversees Portland Police. So we'll keep you posted on what happens during that vote. Well, now to news of a stunning reversal in a high-profile cold case murder. In 2019, detectives in Vancouver announced an arrest in a gruesome case from the mid-90s, citing DNA evidence as the key. But now, just days before the trial was set to begin, Clark County prosecutors have dropped all charges. As Kyle Iboshi found out, some new evidence came to light.
Just 5 days before trial, an Oregon man was set free after spending more than 3 years behind bars. Clark County prosecutors dismissed the case against Richard Knapp, who'd been charged with the 1994 rape and murder of a young Vancouver mother.
He's overwhelmed.
Knapp's defense lawyers explain new evidence cast doubt on the case.
Richard Knapp lost
over 3 years of his life based on a crime that they couldn't prove and that we're convinced he didn't commit.
On July 17, 1995, police found the body of Audrey Frazier in her Vancouver apartment. The then 26-year-old had been strangled to death in bed. Detectives never made any arrests in the case. Years later, Vancouver detectives revisited the cold case by submitting genetic data from DNA found at the crime scene into a public database, like those used for researching family history. The process pointed detectives to Knapp, who lived in the area around the time of Frazier's murder. In April of 2019, Vancouver detectives held a press conference to announce his arrest. But Knapp's defense lawyers say police relied too heavily on DNA and missed key evidence in the case.
DNA technology is immensely powerful, but it's not a silver bullet. And if it is not used in the proper way in conjunction with competent police work, you're going to end up with more situations like this.
Knapp's defense claims another suspect in the case changed his story during a recent deposition, admitting to having sex with Frazier the night she died. Additionally, the defense claims the neighbor's semen was found on the victim's bedspread, and they located a critical eyewitness who'd previously not been interviewed by police. I spoke with Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Jeff McCarty, who admitted in light of the new evidence, prosecutors didn't feel confident they could prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, explaining, quote, "We know that we either released a killer from jail or we released an innocent person who was wrongly held for 3 years. We know that one of those things happened, and that is not an easy decision to make." While awaiting trial, Knapp lost his job, his home, and his wife. She died in June of 2021 while he was in jail. Kyle Aboshi, KGW News.
All right, now let's get to some news that's still reverberating around Soccer City, USA tonight. Merritt Paulson announced he is selling the Portland Thorns months after an investigation revealed a toxic culture within the soccer club. Paulson is not selling the Timbers, though, at this moment. But in a statement, he said everything the Thorns accomplished on and off the pitch exceeded his expectations. But he regrets what he calls failures, adding the Thorns have much more potential and a new owner is needed to achieve that. Our Mike Benner is at Providence Park tonight with the story.
Portland, go celebrate! This night belonged to the Thorns!
Fresh off their third National Women's Soccer League championship, the Portland Thorns are for sale. Owner Merritt Paulson revealing the news Thursday morning.
It's a really good step forward, but it's not complete yet.
Tina Etlin is a member of the Rose City Riveters Steering Committee and a member of the 107ist, a nonprofit that supports both the Thorns and Timbers. It's Tina's belief that Paulson should not stop at selling the Thorns.
I mean, the same reason Merritt is unfit to own the Thorns is the same reason he's unfit to own the Timbers. So, I mean, he still needs to sell the Timbers as well.
For now, there are no plans to do that. Paulson only intends to sell the Thorns, a decision that does not come out of nowhere, not by a long shot. You might recall back in October, Paulson removed himself as CEO of the Thorns and Timbers. The shakeup at the top of both soccer clubs coming after a months-long investigation into allegations of abuse in the NWSL. The investigation revealed a toxic culture of sexual, emotional, and verbal abuse across the league and within the Thorns organization. Former coach Paul Riley was to blame for a lot of that. But the investigation also showed patterns of misconduct by Paulson and front office staffers Gavin Wilkinson and Mike Golub, who were dismissed.
I don't know if I'd be able to start with anything, but I'm sorry.
That's Paulson telling sports columnist and radio show host John Canzano in a one-on-one interview he failed the players, namely the ones who were subjected to the abuse. Paulson also took ownership for his handling of Coach Paul Riley.
There's no excuse for that coach ever working another day. He shouldn't have been working to begin with, and certainly never should have worn a Portland Thorns badge. We could have done more and we could have done better, and they were failed by institutions and people, and I think the league's going to be stronger coming out of this.
That's certainly the hope, and playing a big role in that will be the Thorns' next owner, who, according to Tina Etlin, must check a lot of boxes.
Any group or person that'll center the players and the employees within that building and make sure that their needs are met first and foremost. somebody that understands the history of soccer in Portland and embraces that.
In light of what's happened across the league and right here in Portland with the Thorns, the league commissioner is establishing a player safety office, and we can tell you that Merritt Paulson is pledging $1 million to that work. Reporting from outside Providence Park, I'm Mike Benner for KGW News.
Still ahead on The Story. In just 1 week, Oregon's Measure 114 is set to take effect. Advocates say it'll save lives. Opponents argue it infringes on their constitutional rights. But tomorrow, a judge will decide whether or not to pause 114's implementation. And we're getting a look at court documents showing each side making their case. When The Story returns. So in just 1 week, Oregon's voter-approved Measure 114 is set to take effect. Now, there's a chance that Measure 114 does not take effect next Thursday. That's up to a judge to decide during a hearing tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. So more on that in a minute. But in case you haven't been paying attention, Measure 114 is a really strict form of gun control that will vastly change the way that guns are bought and sold in Oregon. Since it narrowly passed in this election, several lawsuits have been filed, including another one just today by the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Here's a recap of what would change if the law does take effect. Any people who want to buy a gun will have to get a permit first. Those will be issued by local law enforcement, but the process to do that is still unclear, and state police, they will put that together. So the steps to getting a permit include completing a gun safety class that meets certain requirements and then submitting to a federal criminal background check, which does include getting your fingerprints taken. Those permits could cost up to $65 and would be good for 5 years. If you are denied a permit, there is an appeal process, but if you're approved for a permit, there is no limit on the number of guns you can buy. These permits would not be required to own a gun, only to purchase one, meaning current legal gun owners do not need a permit unless they want to buy another gun. Okay, Measure 114 also bans the sale, transfer, and manufacture of ammunition magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. With the exception of people being those who already own these magazines, they can keep them and use them in specific locations, like your private property or shooting ranges. New high-capacity magazines just cannot be made or sold. Now let's talk more about tomorrow's hearing. It stems from the first lawsuit filed against 114, which wants the measure tossed out because plaintiffs argue that it violates their Second Amendment and due process rights. Tomorrow's hearing is for a judge to decide on whether to place an injunction or pause to put the measure on hold until a ruling can be made on the constitutionality of the measure. We'll be watching closely tomorrow at 10 a.m. to see what that judge decides to do. But ahead of that hearing, Oregon's Attorney General filed a 42-page response urging the judge to allow the measure to become law next week, saying that any pause to the measure would lead to, quote, unnecessary deaths. Plaintiffs have targeted the high-capacity magazine section of the measure, arguing that without them, law-abiding gun owners will be at a disadvantage when confronting criminals. The AG contends that magazines hold more than 10 rounds that hold more than 10 rounds are not arms protected by the Second Amendment, and that current gun owners involved in the lawsuit will not be harmed if the measure becomes law. Writing, plaintiffs can continue to keep and bear the arms they currently possess, which is enough to protect their Second Amendment rights for the pendency of this litigation. The Attorney General's office also disagrees that Measure 114 violates the due process rights of the plaintiffs, saying that people who already own high-capacity magazines can keep them and use them in certain instances. They're not being taken away. Quote, the law does not punish past purchases, only future conduct. Legislation readjusting rights and burdens of such ownership is not unlawful solely because it upsets otherwise settled expectations. Now, when the Attorney General's office, what they did not talk about, though, in this filing is what's being done by state police or local law enforcement to actually get that permit process up and running in just a matter of days. In fact, even today, the Eugene Police Department came out and flatly said it will not have the permitting process in place by next Thursday, but says it is working with state police, the Association of Chiefs of Police, and the state's Sheriff's Association to implement a permit system as soon as possible. In that same statement, the police department pointed to numerous questions about Measure 114 that still need answering from the state and the courts. Answers that have to be found in just 7 days, unless the judge puts the measure on hold during tomorrow's hearing. So stay tuned for that. Well, still to come on the story, and on a lighter note, Fred Meyer used to be known for its extravagant giveaways whenever it opened a new store around town. But 73 years ago today, it advertised a baby as a prize for some lucky couple. Did the store actually give away an infant, or was it just a PR stunt? We'll explain in a trip to the KGW vault when the story returns. Okay, this is going to be fun. We're heading into the KGW vault tonight for a special anniversary of a really wacky piece of Portland history. 73 years ago today, on a Thursday, as a matter of fact, Fred Meyer held an unusual promotion to celebrate the grand opening of its Hollywood District store. So it advertised a baby as the top prize for people who entered a raffle for coming to the grand opening. Yeah, an actual baby. So here's a clip from the story that Kyle Iboshi put together to investigate whether this was the real deal.
Back in the day, Fred Meyer was known for its crazy promotions. One store brought in the world's biggest wheel of cheese. They'd have special appearances, including local radio personalities. And Fred Meyer often celebrated new stores with giant cakes. I mean, these cakes were huge and could serve hundreds of people. At the opening of the new Fred Meyer store at Southeast 82nd and Foster, 14-year-old Marilyn Burnett of Woodmere School walked away with a live pony. A pony! That's Mrs. Fred Meyer, Fred's wife, shaking hands with the pony. So giving away a baby wasn't out of the question. The night of the big baby giveaway arrived on Thursday, December 1st, 1949. Newspaper reporter Al McCready wrote, "It was a happy crowd of more than 1,000 that jammed the food show building at the new Fred Meyer Hollywood store at Northeast 41st Avenue and Sandy Boulevard to see the fun. Hundreds more clamored outside the entrance for admission, but there was no room for them." Shortly after 8, MC Dick Rand made the big announcement. Mr. George Linderman and his wife of 3112 Southeast 59th Avenue were called to the stage. They were the grand prize winners. Linderman, wearing a dark suit and tie, looked like a respectable and deserving father of a 2-month-old baby. But to be sure, the MC questioned Linderman and his wife. And then, the lucky couple waited. The crowd grew anxious and uneasy until MC Dick Rand presented the lucky husband and wife with their prize. A baby. Chinchilla. The crowd laughed. Linderman smiled, holding his new pet rodent. Reporter McCready wrote, "The furry little creature prized in fur coat manufacture and said to be worth $500 came complete with a cage, a bottle of food pellets, and a bundle of hay." "That's his layette," cracked Dick Rand. Sitting back on the stage and grinning happily, McCready wrote, was Hal M. White, Fred Meyer, public relations manager. The great baby giveaway was just a gag, and the crowd loved it.
Isn't that a great story? By the way, if you'd like to watch the full story, and you really should, you can find it right now on the KGW YouTube channel. And if you remember hearing any stories about crazy Fred Meyer giveaways, or if you maybe went to one yourself, we would love to hear about it. Send us an email to thestory@kgw.com or leave us a voicemail at 503-226-5090. But stay with us. We'll finish the show right after this. Hey, that's the end of our show today. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.